Did you know that you could lend on a deal, have it completely fall through, and still get paid back not only the money you lent, but also the return? I'm not 100% sure I knew that either, but then it happened. And as always, I do things, I learn a little bit, and then I come back here to tell all of you. So today, that's what we're going to do. Let's do it. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ryan, and on this channel, I like to go make a bunch of mistakes, come back, and tell you guys about them and all the things I learned so that hopefully you have a little bit easier time than I did. But in this video, we're actually going to be talking about a win and how it was made possible so that you guys have a better understanding of all the different possibilities when it comes to lending. And as usual, this deal is about EMD lending. So let's jump down to the whiteboard and talk about the deal itself. On this deal, the EMD that we were lending was $2,500. Nothing too crazy there, right? Normal deal. And per my usual, our agreement was that at closing, I was going to make 40% on that $2,500. So 40%, let's see, that comes out to $1,000 if I'm not mistaken. So that's going to be plus 1,000. Awesome, fantastic. We love when deals go according to plan, but shocker, this one didn't. So what happened? Well, let's break down a timeline of events here. I'm gonna draw you guys out an entire timeline. So here we've got deal under contract. And after a deal goes under contract, the first thing that you need to do to verify, to validate the deal is send in earnest money, right? Which is, of course, where I come in. So the next step here is need EMD. And then right after that comes fund EMD. And on this deal, and hopefully all of your deals and everybody else's deal, we've got Ryan up here funding the deal. That's what happened here. So after I fund EMD, what happens? Well, after, during, before, whatever you want to call it, but during the inspection period, we'll throw on the timeline here that the next thing they do is find a buyer. And if you're working with a wholesaler, obviously that is the crux, right? That's the big point. They got to go find a buyer. Nobody's making money if they don't find a buyer. And on this deal, we can put a big check mark right there because they found a buyer. Fantastic. That means I don't have to take my money back out. That means I'm going to make money. That's great. And when they find a buyer, the way that the buyer locks down the EMD is they send EMD. I'll draw our little buyer stick figure up here. So the buyer sends in their money. You guys have heard me talk about this plenty, but I love breaking down specific deals. So on this deal, the buyer brings the money. That money covers my money, in theory, if all goes according to plan. And that way my money is protected. So I put $2,500 in. The buyer put $5,000 in. So their money covered my money. Everybody's happy. Now, we've got this gap between when the buyer comes in and when the deal actually closes, where a bunch of real estate garbage happens, right? They check title, they do all the paperwork, they set up the HUD, all this fun stuff that I don't really care about, but I kind of do care about because it's what makes the deal go through. And then we get to the end, right? So, we go all the way over here, and then we have closing. So to recap, we've got a check mark under contract. We've got a check mark, needs EMD. We've got a check mark, fund the EMD. Check mark, find the buyer. Check mark, send EMD. And then we get to the end, and we only need one more check mark, and what happens? We get a big old X. We do not get to closing. What happens? Well, the buyer backs out. And sadly, this happens often, and usually the buyers try to make up some excuse for why they can't close or whatever. And in this case, I'll tell you guys exactly what the excuse was. Or it doesn't even have to be an excuse, it's just a reason. Right? A reason can be an excuse or not, whatever you want to make it, but put a little star here. The reason they couldn't do it is lack of funding. So a little tidbit that came up actually on this deal when I was talking with the wholesaler that I thought I'd bring up is that there's a large spread between new buyers and experienced buyers. And everybody wants experienced buyers because the experienced buyers have experience. They've got a track record. They know what they're doing. Here's a downside that people don't necessarily consider. When you have a lack of funding, first of all, let's talk about our experienced buyer here. we'll put a old-fashioned question mark there, and here's why. When you have an experienced buyer come in, oftentimes that means that they are buying a lot of properties. And if you have an experienced buyer buying a lot of properties, typically, at least in the world that I operate in, and probably a lot of you guys operate in, they go raise capital, right? They have capital partners, usually different ones, and oftentimes for each deal, they're going to go find their capital partners for that deal, right? So the deal goes under contract, they go look for capital partners. That was the case here. And when they're doing a bunch of deals at once, sometimes a deal can slip through the cracks or they don't get everything done. So that reliable buyer now becomes a lot less reliable. And that's exactly what happens here. So we get to closing, they don't have the money. Now, they try to push closing back on this deal, but that's not always acceptable, especially if you don't have a good reason, right? So they didn't have a good reason, it's just they straight up didn't have the funds. And the seller was not interested in pushing it back, so they went ahead and canceled the deal. The deal was in default. Okay, now you have an understanding of where we're at. So, what happens now? Well, we have the deal get canceled. So we have, basically, when you wholesale a deal, you've got two different things, right? You've got an A to B contract, and the A to B contract is basically the wholesale contract. Okay? It's the first contract. Then you have a B to C contract. And the B to C contract is going to be the buyer slash assignee. So, when you sign a contract, whatever type of contract is, it comes with earnest money. As we've discussed, earnest money is what makes a contract valid. It's what says this contract has been executed. So, if you go up here and you look at it, the earnest money for the A to B contract was $2,500. And the earnest money for the B to C contract was $5,000. So, little lesson here for when a deal doesn't go through. What happens with this money? Well, generally speaking, and this is going to be different depending on the contract, but I'll talk about this deal in particular. Generally speaking, for the A to B contract, you're going to have an inspection period. And if you do whatever you plan on doing before that inspection period ends, right, you find your buyer or whatever, then your money is now going to become non-refundable after that inspection ends. That means that if the deal cancels for any reason after the inspection period, which in this case it did, that money is non-refundable. So, we've gotten to the point where the buyer canceled. What happens? Well, this $2,500 that came from me is going to go to the seller because that's what we signed in the contract. We said, if anything goes wrong and we back out after the inspection period, the seller gets the money. So that $2,500 is going to go to the seller. But in this scenario, then we have a second transaction, right? A second contract all jumbled into this one thing. Welcome to the world of wholesaling with $5,000. And that $5,000 is going to go to the wholesaler. So technically, when I say that your money is protected by the other person's money, it's not that your exact money is protected, because your exact money is actually lost to the seller in this scenario. But if you were to say, this money goes away, this money moves up, right? It comes to you. The $5,000 comes to you in the trade. So this wholesaler actually ended up in the green. Now, they didn't end up nearly as green as they would have had the deal gone through. So it's certainly not a win on their part. But let's go to my job as the lender, since that's what I'm talking about. So my goal here was to lend $2,500, make an additional $1,000, and end up with $3,500 coming back total. So what actually happened? Well, because this $5,000 here ended up coming back, what the wholesaler was able to do, due to our agreement, right, which we have the paperwork, we have the contracts and stuff in place to do this, once that EMD comes in, we are locked in to get a return, right, because now we are committed to the entire thing. If this deal had canceled within the inspection, we do not charge, we being me, I do not charge a return because the deal didn't go through, so there's not actually any surplus money to pay out, and so I wouldn't do that. But in this case, the deal technically had gone through, right? The buyer had put in their earnest money, and we went, if you go up to the timeline, we went all the way through the whole timeline, right? We went through the full 30 days before this buyer backed out. So I have fulfilled my obligation of giving them money for 30 days to hold on this deal and give them the ability, not the right, not a guarantee, but the ability to make money. And so when we get down here, this $3,500, we had $5,000 in surplus. I'll draw the arrow over here. So what happened on this deal was that the $3,500 that was owed to me, since the deal did make it to the finish line, it didn't get finished, but it made it to the finish line, that $3,500 goes to me. So if we're to break it down here, Ryan is going to get back his $2,500 plus $1,000, end up $3,500, which, to be clear, is the same amount of money I would have made had the deal closed, right? So Ryan is happy, right? We got everything that we needed out of this deal, and we fulfilled our obligation. Now, I wish I could make more buyers fulfill their obligations because they like to not do that. But the wholesaler here, again, even though the deal did not go nearly as well as we would have hoped, the wholesaler ends up with the $5,000 from the buyer, right, minus the $3,500 that they paid back to me. So the wholesaler ends up with $1,500. If you're in the wholesale world, you know that's not really a profit. They probably end up paying their TC and whatever, and the amount of time wasted. It's not a good situation, so certainly not ideal. But we both ended up making money, so to speak. We ended up in the green, which I can tell you from my wholesale days, did not always happen to me. Mostly because I was an idiot / didn't know what I was doing. But point is, at least everybody comes out somewhat a winner here and not in the red. So overall, it's a good deal. So that's how it was broken down. I hope that made sense as far as how the deal actually worked and how I was able to make money without the deal actually going through. This is why we have contracts in place. This is why we discuss scenarios with people. This is why we understand that deals do not always go through and prepare for said process and problem so that when it happens, we're not freaking out, running around like a chicken with our head cut off. We understand this is part of the game. And so on this one, it's part of the game. It's not fun, especially for the wholesaler. It definitely sucked. On our end, again, this is why a lot of people always say, I want to be the lender, not the borrower, right? On our end, because we fulfilled our obligations, even though the deal ended up sucking, we came out the exact same. And that's one, not always, but one scenario where you can actually win as the lender even when other people may not do as much. So hopefully this was helpful and you learned something. If you have any questions about this, go ahead and throw it down in the comments below. And if you guys want to learn more from me about lending, about what I'm doing, and get specific deal breakdowns, I have an entire free group that I've made for exactly that on Skool. Check it out. There's a banner and a link right down below. You can jump in there for free $99, and I help people learn all about safety, lending, and everything that I'm doing every single week. So I'll see you guys in there. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.